Deep in the heart of the dense forest, Rex, the lead German shepherd, sniffed the air, his nose twitching as he stopped abruptly, his body tense, his ears pricked up as if listening for something hidden within the silence around him. The other dogs in the group sensed his unease and halted at once, their eyes fixed on him as their handlers took notice of the sudden change in behavior. There was a stillness in the air that didn't feel right. The usual hum of the forest was absent, no birds singing, no insects buzzing, just an eerie quiet that stretched through the trees like a thick fog. Rex lowered his head, his nose working harder as he sniffed the ground and the wind blowing through the trees. The handler took a step forward, glancing at the dog in concern. "What is it, Rex?" the handler murmured, his voice low, almost as if speaking louder would disturb the uneasy calm of the forest. The dog's eyes never left the trail in front of them. It was as if he had caught a scent, something new, something dangerous. The handler's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but the dogs had already begun to move as if drawn by an invisible pull. Rex was the first to dart ahead, his legs moving with an almost predatory grace, his nose low to the ground. The rest of the canines followed suit, falling into formation with a synchronized precision that only months of training could produce. The handler hesitated for a moment before signaling the others to follow. They quickly fell into line, moving swiftly through the underbrush. Rex led the way, his tail stiff and his body alert. Every movement was calculated, his senses sharp. As the team trekked deeper into the forest, the trees began to grow thicker around them, their trunks gnarled and twisted with age, the path growing narrower and more treacherous. The ground became soft and uneven, their boots sinking into the mud as they pushed forward. But the dogs didn't slow down, they moved with purpose, their heads constantly scanning the surroundings as if they knew something was waiting just ahead. The handler's heart began to race, a gnawing feeling of unease creeping up his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and Rex's behavior only added to his anxiety. They reached a clearing where the trees opened up to reveal a strange sight. It was there in the middle of the clearing, chained to a large tree, a man. The ranger's face was bruised, his clothes torn and filthy, his body slumped over as if unconscious. The dogs immediately fanned out around the figure, their eyes narrowing as they assessed the situation. Rex was the first to approach, cautiously stepping forward, his nose brushing the man's hand with gentle urgency, trying to get a response. The other canines circled the ranger, their low growls cutting through the silence of the forest. The handler quickly rushed forward, his hand outstretched, but Rex was ahead of him, standing between the ranger and the handler, his gaze locked on the figure before them. The dogs were clearly unsettled. This was no ordinary encounter. The handler could feel his pulse quicken, his mind racing to piece together what they had stumbled upon. He could sense the danger that lurked in the shadows, waiting for any sign of weakness. It was clear this wasn't just a routine search. The forest had hidden something far darker than they had anticipated. The canines had sensed it long before he did. Now they stood together at the edge of the clearing with the silent forest watching them all. The hunter stepped forward, his hand outstretched toward the unconscious ranger, but Rex growled low, stepping closer to the man, his body a shield between the handler and the stranger, his eyes locked on the figure with an intensity that made the handler pause for a moment. It was unlike Rex to behave this way, but the canine's instincts were always sharp, and in moments like this the handler trusted them more than anything. The dogs moved around the ranger, their noses pressing against his body as they sniffed for any signs of danger. Their posture was tense, their growls soft but persistent, as if they could sense a hidden threat in the air. Rex circled the ranger's form, his nose brushing against the chains that bound him to the tree, his ears flattening back as if disturbed by the metal. The handler crouched down to get a closer look at the chains. They were old, rusted, and seemed to have been there for far longer than they should have. The links were thick and heavy, almost as if they had been made to hold something far stronger than a man. Yet the ranger appeared fragile, his breathing shallow, his body trembling with every exhale. The handler's heart raced as he examined the man's injuries, bruises marred his face and arms, his clothes torn and stained with dirt and blood. Whoever had done this hadn't cared for his survival, they'd wanted him to suffer. The dogs continued to circle the man, their eyes scanning the area, their focus never wavering from the ranger. Rex kept his nose close to the chains, sniffing them carefully and then looking back at the handler, his eyes intense. The handler understood Rex was trying to tell him something important. The ranger had been trapped here for a reason. The hunter could feel it. Now the air around them felt charged with a strange energy, like a storm was gathering in the distance. The hunter reached for his radio to call for backup, but his hand faltered as a sudden chill ran down his spine. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Rex's growl deepened as the K9s began to move more aggressively, their bodies tense, as if preparing for something unseen in the trees. The hunter's mind braced. He had been trained to remain calm in situations like this, but the unease that gripped him was undeniable. He signaled to his team to spread out and form a perimeter, but they were already on edge, their eyes scanning the shadows beyond the clearing, waiting for something to reveal itself. The handler looked down at the ranger, his face pale and sweat-soaked. He was alive, but barely. There was a faint glimmer of recognition in his eyes when he looked up at the handler, but the terror in his gaze told a different story. The man was afraid not just of his captors, but of something else, something deeper, something that the dogs had sensed long before the handler did. The K9s were still on alert, their movements quick and sharp, their eyes darting from one corner of the clearing to the next. It was clear that the ranger wasn't the only thing they were protecting. There was a looming danger in the forest, something far more sinister than they had anticipated. The handler's stomach twisted as he realized they had walked into a trap. But it was too late to turn back now. Rex's head snapped up, and his ears perked as if hearing something in the distance. The handler's grip tightened on his radio, as the silence of the forest seemed to stretch on forever. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the handler knelt beside the ranger, his mind racing with thoughts of what could be happening and what they had walked into. Rex continued to circle the unconscious man, his growls soft but constant, his eyes scanning the shadows with an intensity that made the handler's chest tighten. The other dogs were equally on edge, their bodies stiff, their eyes darting back and forth between the ranger and the trees as if they expected something to emerge from the darkness at any moment. The handler reached down to check the ranger's pulse. It was weak, but steady. The man was alive, just barely. The dogs were silent now, their movements slow as they waited for any sign of movement. The handler's grip on his radio tightened again, but he hesitated to call for backup. There was something about the way the dogs were acting that told him they weren't just protecting the ranger, they were protecting something else, something that had yet to reveal itself. Rex's ears suddenly pricked up, and he stopped circling the ranger, his eyes fixed on a spot in the trees just beyond the clearing. The handler looked up sharply, his heart pounding as he scanned the area. But he saw nothing, just the twisted trunks of the trees and the shifting shadows in the moonlight. Rex moved forward slowly, his nose to the ground, his body low to the earth. The other dogs followed suit instinctively, their focus sharp and unyielding, as if they were tracking something unseen. The handler stood up, his hand resting on his sidearm. As he watched the K9s move with military precision, Rex stopped just short of the edge of the clearing and sniffed the air. His tail stiffened, and he barked sharply. Once the signal was clear, the handler's heart skipped a beat. Something was coming, but what was it? The dogs were already preparing for whatever threat was closing in, their bodies tense, their eyes never leaving the dark forest beyond the clearing. It was as if they knew exactly what was coming, but the hunter couldn't shake the feeling that they were too late. Whatever it was already here. The other dogs began to grow softly, their posture shifting as they stood their ground, their ears flattening back as if preparing for an attack. Rex continued to bark, but this time it was different. It was urgent and commanding, as if he was calling for help. But the handler knew help was far away and time was running out. He turned his head to look at the ranger, who was still unconscious, but his face twisted in pain as if he could sense something in the air. The handler reached down to shake him gently, but the man's eyes fluttered open and locked onto his with a look of pure terror. His voice cracked as he gasped out words that made the handler's blood run cold. "Don't let them take me. They'll kill you too. They won't stop." The handler didn't have time to process the words before Rex barked again, this time more aggressively, and the other dogs joined in with a chorus of warning barks. The sound of footsteps suddenly echoed through the trees, and the hunter's heart raced. He could feel the weight of the moment closing in on him. The dogs were ready, but were they ready for what was coming? The sound of footsteps grew louder, coming closer with each passing second. The handler's grip on his radio tightened, his heart pounding in his chest. Rex stood at the forefront, his body rigid, his eyes scanning the trees, his growls deepening as the footsteps drew nearer. The other canines stood with him, their bodies tense, their eyes locked on the shadows of the forest, every instinct telling them danger was near. The handler took a deep breath and motioned for his team to spread out. They moved quickly and quietly, their eyes darting between the trees, but the sense of dread that hung in the air was overwhelming. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting for something to happen. Rex's barking had stopped now, but his stance had not changed. He stood like a sentinel, guarding the ranger from whatever unseen threat loomed just beyond the clearing. The handler could feel the weight of the silence pressing in around them. Every second stretched longer than the last as they waited for whatever would come. The ranger stirred, his face contorted with pain, his breathing shallow as he tried to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "They're coming for me. You need to get me out of here before they do." The handler leaned closer to the man. "What are you talking about? Who's coming?" The ranger's eyes were wide with terror, his body shaking. He looked over his shoulder as though he expected to see something moving in the shadows. The handler didn't have time to argue with him. The sound of the footsteps was almost upon them, and the dogs were ready to spring into action. Rex's hackles but raised, his teeth bared as the air seemed to grow colder with every passing moment. The handler glanced back at his team. They were positioned around the clearing, but the trees seemed endless, and there was no way to tell where the threat was coming from, just that it was coming closer. Rex barked again, this time sharp and commanding, as though he was warning whatever was out there that it was too late to turn back. The handler took one more look at the ranger, then turned back to his team. "Move fast, get to the trees on the other side," he said, his voice low and urgent. But as his men started to move, the ground beneath them seemed to tremble slightly. The handler froze, his eyes darting to the trees, and the canines were already reacting, their eyes wide and their bodies coiled like springs. They could feel it too. There was something in the air, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The wind picked up suddenly, the trees groaning as the air shifted, and then they heard it, the sound of something large moving through the woods, the trees shaking under its weight. The canines started to bark again, louder now, their voices a warning to the unseen force approaching, and in that moment the handler understood. They weren't just facing an enemy, they were facing something far darker, something ancient that had lived in the forest long before they ever set foot here. The ranger's eyes locked onto the handlers. "You have no idea what you're up against," he whispered. "They won't stop until they have me. They're always hunting." The forest seemed to close in around them, the canines barking louder now, their growls more urgent as the distant sounds of something heavy moving through the trees grew closer with every heartbeat. The handler's pulse braced. He scanned the area, his eyes darting between the trees and the dark shapes forming in the shadows. But there was nothing visible, no movement in the trees, only the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush. As the dogs remained on edge, their bodies tense and alert, Rex barked once more, the command sharp and unmistakable, as if telling the handler to stay ready. The ranger's terrified eyes locked onto the handlers again, his voice barely a whisper. "They're coming. They're going to find us. You need to get me out of here." Now the handler's mind raced. He had no idea who or what was after the ranger, but the look in the man's eyes told him it was nothing he had ever faced before. The dogs were acting like they had sensed a predator of an entirely different nature. Their instincts were honed to protect their handlers, but this was something new, something that made them uneasy. The air had grown thick with tension, and the wind began to pick up, swirling through the trees, as if something unseen was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. The handler stepped forward, his hand gripping his radio tightly, but his heart sank as he heard the crunch of leaves beneath his feet. Just beyond the trees, he signaled to his team to stay low and spread out, but there was no time to prepare, no time to plan. The canines were already reacting, their bodies tense. As the sound of heavy footsteps drew nearer, the dogs shifted into defensive positions, surrounding the ranger with a protective circle, their teeth bared, their eyes fixed on the darkness. The handler's fingers tightened around the radio as he called for backup, but there was no reply. The static buzzed in his ear As his heart pounded louder than the sound of the approaching force, the forest seemed to hold its breath, and in that silence the handler knew they were no longer alone. Rex's fur bristled as he sniffed the air, his eyes never leaving the shadows behind them. Something was moving out there, but it was not human. It was something darker, something more dangerous. The trees swayed and creaked as if the very forest was alive, and the hunter could feel the ground beneath him shift as the unknown presence grew closer. Rex's stance shifted. He stepped in front of the ranger, his body poised and ready to defend, his eyes fixed on the tree line as the other dogs mirrored him, their movements synchronized and sharp. Their training had prepared them for any threat. But this felt different. The handler's throat tightened as the footsteps grew louder with every passing second. The air was thick with dread, and the dogs were ready to spring into action. They could feel the danger approaching, and their loyalty to the ranger and their handler was unwavering. The handler's mind raced, trying to process the situation, but all he could do was wait and watch as the unknown force grew closer. With every heartbeat, a shadow emerged from the darkness, its shape massive and imposing, a creature that was not human, but something far older, something that had been hiding in the forest for centuries. The creature emerged from the shadows, its massive form slowly taking shape as the darkness seemed to fold in around it. The hunter's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding as the K9s growled and circled protectively around the ranger, their bodies poised to strike at any moment. Rex's eyes were locked on the figure, his growl a low rumble deep in his chest. The other dogs were just as alert, their hackles raised, their muscles coiled, ready for whatever came next. The handler's mind raced, but there was no time for thought, only action. As the creature stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. The trees creaked under its weight, and the very air seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The handler instinctively reached for his sidearm, but even as his fingers brushed against the cold metal, he knew it wouldn't be enough against whatever this thing was. The creature was taller than any man, its skin was pale and mottled with strange markings that seemed to shift in the moonlight. Its eyes glowed an eerie shade of yellow, and they were fixed on the ranger with an intensity that made the handler's blood run cold. A sullen, sharp bark from Rex snapped the handler out of his trance. The dogs sprang into action, their bodies moving with the precision of well-trained warriors. Rex lunged forward, his teeth bared as he aimed for the creature's throat. But the thing was faster than expected. It dodged with unnatural agility, its long limbs moving in a fluid motion that defied the laws of nature. Rex landed hard on the ground, but quickly recovered, his eyes never leaving the creature. As it turned to face him, the other dogs were right behind him, their barks growing louder, their growls more intense as they prepared to attack again. The handler's heart raced as he backed away from the scene, his eyes never leaving the creature that towered over them. He couldn't understand what they were facing, but every instinct told him it wasn't something that could be fought with guns or physical strength. The K9s knew it too, their movements were calculated, their eyes sharp. But there was something in their stance that spoke of uncertainty. The creature let out a low growl of its own that sent a shiver through the handler's spine. Its mouth opened wide, showing rows of sharp teeth as it advanced towards Rex. But the K9s were not about to back down. They attacked with a fury, their teeth sinking into the creature's flesh. But it barely seemed to notice the attack. Its body was unnaturally tough, and its skin felt like stone under their jaws. Rex barked again, a sharp, commanding sound as the dogs continued to press forward with relentless determination. But the creature just laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the trees like a warning. And in that moment, the hunter realized they were not going to win this battle, not by strength alone. The creature was playing with them, it was toying with them like prey, and the hunter's stomach twisted with the horrible realization that they were far outmatched in this fight. The ranger's voice broke through the chaos. "You don't understand, it can't be killed, it can't be stopped. The creature is part of the forest, and the forest never lets go." The ranger's words echoed in the handler's mind like a warning that couldn't be ignored. The forest never lets go. The handler barely had time to process them before the creature lunged forward, its claws swiping at the K9s. With terrifying speed, Rex was the first to respond. He darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's strike, his fur bristling as he barked fiercely at the thing. But the creature's movements were too fast, too fluid for even the dogs to keep up with. It was like trying to catch a shadow, something that wasn't bound by the same rules as they were. The canines continued to attack, but their jaws snapped at empty air as the creature twisted and turned its limbs, moving with an unnatural grace that defied logic. The handler's heart pounded in his chest as he moved backward away from the chaos, the radio in his hand static filled and silent. There was no backup coming, no help to rely on. The creature was relentless, its glowing eyes fixed on the ranger, as it seemed to savor the moment before it struck again. Rex lunged for its legs, this time his teeth finding purchase in the creature's flesh. But it barely flinched, its skin was like stone, and the canine was thrown back with terrifying force, landing hard on the ground, but quickly scrambling back to his feet. The other dogs moved in, trying to flank the creature from behind, but it was always one step ahead. Its reflexes were too sharp, its presence too overwhelming. The handler reached for his gun again, but the weight of it felt insignificant in his hands. It wouldn't matter, the creature wasn't of this world, and no weapon could stop it. Rex was barking again, but this time it wasn't a challenge, it was a call to his pack as the other dogs formed a tight circle around the ranger, their bodies moving in perfect unison. The handler watched helplessly as the creature's yellow eyes flickered between the dogs and the man, seemed to be deciding which one to take first, and for a brief moment, the handler thought they might actually lose everything. The creature's lips curled back, revealing sharp teeth as it lunged for the ranger, its claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. But just before it could strike, Rex leaped forward, his body colliding with the creature's side with such force that it staggered back. The dogs attacked again, all at once, their jaws snapping at the creature's limbs, but the creature swiped them away with ease, its eyes fixed on Rex. Now, as it snarled in frustration, the handler looked to the ranger, who was now visibly shaking, his body trembling with fear. He couldn't protect himself, he couldn't fight this thing. The ranger's eyes flickered to the dogs, their courage unmistakable. But even they were being overpowered. The creature was playing with them, toying with them, and the handler felt the crushing weight of that realization settle over him in the pit of his stomach. The creature was going to win, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Not with force, not with strength, not with anything they had. It was too powerful, too ancient, too tied to the very earth that surrounded them. The handler's mind raced, trying to think of any way out, but all he could focus on was the sight of Rex and the others fighting with every ounce of strength they had, despite knowing that they were hopelessly outmatched. And then, in that moment of helplessness, the ranger whispered softly, "It's not just the creature, it's the forest, it's alive." The handler froze as the ranger's words sank in. The forest itself was alive. It wasn't just the creature that was hunting them, it was the land, the trees, the earth beneath their feet. Everything was part of something older, something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The canines continued to fight with all their might, but it was clear the creature was no longer their only enemy. The ground beneath them seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The trees groaned and shifted as if reacting to the battle. Rex and the other dogs were locked in a desperate struggle to hold their ground, their jaws snapping at the creature's limbs. But every attack felt like it only slowed it down for a moment before it retaliated with even more vicious force. The hunter's thoughts raced. He had no idea what kind of enemy they were facing, but one thing was clear: they were completely out of their depth. They couldn't fight this thing with force or firepower, and they couldn't outrun it. The creature's movements were too swift, the forest too thick, and it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. Rex was knocked back again, this time his body crashing hard into the ground. The hunter's heart clenched as he watched his canine struggle to rise. But Rex wasn't giving up. The dog shook his head and pushed himself back onto his feet, his eyes fierce and determined. The other dogs didn't back down either. Despite the overwhelming odds, they continued to fight relentlessly. But even they couldn't ignore the fact that the forest was closing in around them. The trees seemed to lean in, watching the battle with an almost sentient awareness. The hunter could feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on him, and the ranger's words echoed in his mind over and over again. "The forest is alive." The handler turned back to the ranger, his mind grasping for some kind of solution. But the man's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. The ranger looked at him with an expression that seemed to speak volumes, as if he had known all along that this would happen. It wasn't just the creature hunting him, it was the forest itself that had trapped him here, and now it was hunting them all. The hunter's eyes flickered to Rex, who had once again placed himself between the creature and the ranger. The dog's stance was unwavering, his body prepared to fight and protect until his last breath. The hunter swallowed hard as he realized they couldn't win this battle, not by strength alone, but perhaps there was another way. There had to be. The dogs had been trained for every scenario, but nothing could have prepared them for this ancient power that twisted the very land around them. The hunter's fingers tightened around his sidearm once more, but then his gaze shifted to the trees. He could see now that they were moving, their branches swaying and shifting as if they were alive. A wind began to pick up around them, and the trees seemed to close in, trapping them in a cage of living wood. The creature howled in frustration as it swiped at the canines again, its claws missing them by mere inches. But it was clear it was no longer interested in the dogs. It was focused solely on the ranger, and with one final, brutal lunge, it slammed into the man, knocking him to the ground. The handler screamed in fury as the dogs launched themselves at the creature with everything they had. But they were too late. The ranger's voice cut through the chaos. Don't fight it, you can't stop it, but you can leave.